Why did Condition Critical by Quiet Riot fail? Back in 1983, Quiet Riot released their third studio album named Mental Health. That made them superstars. The album was credited as being the first heavy metal album to reach #1 on the Billboard 200 chart. The album even knocked The Police's Synchronicity out of the #1 spot. They had two big hit singles, the Slade cover, Come On Feel the Noise, and the title track, Mental Health, which reached number 5 and 31 on the Billboard Hot 100 respectively. Mental Health was even considered to be the album that opened doors for other metal bands within the hair metal subgenre. Now, a little over a year later, it's time to release the follow-up to Mental Health with the album Condition Critical. But this album did not achieve the success of Mental Health. So I will be talking about all of that, the reasoning why this album failed to reach the heights of its predecessor. I will be talking about the high expectations placed on the band to duplicate its success, the changes in the musical landscape between 1983 and 1984, the lack of a breakout single, and the attempt to replicate their success with another cover by a classic rock band, Slade, the attempt to make Mental Health Part 2, the tensions with the band and the antics of Kevin Dubrow, the overplaying of the music, and lastly, I will answer the question, is the album any good? Let me first give you a little background on the album. Condition Critical was their fourth studio album. I know a lot of people think it's their second album, but it's actually their fourth album. The band actually began in 1973 by guitarist Randy Rhoads, who, yes, the same Randy Rhoads we know from the first two Ozzy Osbourne albums. They released the first album in 1978 called Quiet Riot, and the second one, Quiet Riot 2, in the same year, 9 months later. But on March 19th, 1982, Randy Rhoads died. But in a strange twist of fate, Quiet Riot would be reborn with the release of Mental Health. So a little over a year later, Condition Critical was released on July 27th, 1984. It is celebrating 40 years. As I already mentioned, the album was not as successful as Mental Health. Now, I mean, it was not a complete flop. It still sold over 1 million copies. It peaked at number 15, which was still good for a metal band back then, but its popularity was short-lived. The album debuted at number 70 the weekend of its release. It hit number 15 about a month later, but by December of that same year, it fell all the way down to 116 and continued to drop. So, what was the reason for this drop? The first reason was it had high expectations placed on it. The band was under a lot of pressure to duplicate the success of its predecessor in a very short amount of time. Keep in mind, this was back in the 80s when bands were releasing albums within 1 or 2 years of each other. So they tried to create Mental Health Part 2, which at the time sounded like a good idea. But if you look back at history, when a band has a very successful album and they followed it up with a better one, the subsequent album usually doesn't sound exactly like the one before it. So take, for example, the band Alice in Chains. Their debut album, Facelift, was very successful, but their follow-up, Dirt, is considered a better album because it didn't sound like an exact replica of their first album. So I think in the case of Quiet Riot, they fell into this trap of trying to make an exact carbon copy of their breakout album. Take, for example, the opening track, Sign of the Times. The song sounds similar to the title track that opened Mental Health, such as the same time signature, the softer part after the solo. Both songs have the same song structure. Then there was the other Slade cover called Mama, We're All Crazy Now. So both Mama, We're All Crazy Now and Come On Feel the Noise both begin with a drum beat, followed by Kevin Dubrow singing the song's title. And I'll play clips of those two for reference. Next was the change in the musical landscape. Music changed from one year to the next very quickly. Back in 1983, metal music was still very new. MTV music videos were just coming out. But by 1984, there were many more bands on MTV and the radio. One of them was Rat with the album Out of the Cellar, which remained on the charts at that time, and that album was number 11 when Condition Critical came out and remained on the charts much longer. Even Twisted Sister, Stay Hungry, was still on the charts at number 41 after many weeks. There was another album that was also released on July 27, 1984, Ride the Lightning by Metallica, which let fans know that there were other types of metal bands. out there to check out. Then there was the fact that there was a lack of a breakout single. They had a music video for the song Party All Night. They tried to make a music video that was similar to their previous ones. The music video begins with parents leaving their nerdy teenage daughter home alone, and she invites some friends over. At first, like, only a few nerdy guys come over, but then they order pizza. And when the pizza place announces that there's a party, a bunch of rockers, they overhear it and they go to the house, and it turns into a scene from a typical 80s teen movie where rockers are destroying the house. The band Quiet Riot are playing live in the girls' living room. But that video was not very popular. Personally, I don't remember it like I did with the videos from that time by bands like Twisted Sister or Rat or Def Leppard. So they decided to play the ace that they had been holding in their hands, and they released the next Slade cover song, Mama, We're All Crazy Now. This one didn't do too bad. It reached number 51 on the Billboard Hot 100, but that's much lower than songs from the previous album. Song outside the music video, which starts with a guy being brought into the emergency room, and he's taken into the scene that was like George Orwell's 1984, with everyone wearing uniforms and looking at a big screen with a metal Quiet Riot mask, and they also showed the band like on stage playing the song. Next is the lack of creativity on the album. We know that metalheads can be very picky and judgmental. Most of the time, metalheads complain when a band changes their style, but they also complain when bands don't change their style. So I think that was one of the factors leading to the failure of this album to reach the success of its predecessor. They also focused on recreating a past success. They felt pressure to remake the same album, as I was talking about a few minutes ago. But here's another example. I've said it in many previous videos that back in the 80s, if a metal band wanted to get noticed, they had to have a good power ballad. This album didn't really have a good power ballad. It had Winners Take All, which starts off pretty good with the acoustic guitars and violins, but it sounds like they're trying to make something along the lines of Queen's We Are the Champions. I thought the song was not too bad, but as far as I know, it was never released as a single. So I don't think it would have charted, so if it had been. Another reason for the failure of this album was the internal tension that was within the band. Kevin Dubrow was a very difficult person to work with. He was arrogant. He had a combative attitude towards music journalists and other musicians. For example, he called the magazine Hit Parader that it was toilet paper, and some of his band members felt that it resulted in negative album reviews. Another reason that the band was not given enough time to relax and take some time to write good music. So let me read a quote by drummer Frankie Banali. As soon as we got back to Los Angeles after the tour, the label wanted us to go straight back into the studio to record another record, with the old strike while the iron is hot type of mentality. The last reason why the album did not do that well was that the market might have been oversaturated with Quiet Riot's music, leading to a decreased interest in a new album. So in other words, they were rushed to make another album, but it eventually backfired on them because in the end, the album was not that good. Now, personally, I think the album is not too bad. I think the previous album, Mental Health, was a much better record, but this one has a few catchy songs. There's a song called Stomp Your Hands, Clap Your Feet, which is one of the dumbest song titles I've ever heard in my life, but it's not too bad. It had a big chorus and it sounds similar to Motley Crue. And then the title track, Condition Critical, is kind of underrated. It's a slower track with big heavy metal guitar riffs and very soaring big vocals. And Scream and Shout was leaning towards speed metal. And the final song, We Were Born to Rock, had a pretty cool Iron Maiden galloping guitar kind of sound. So I don't think it's a really bad album. I don't mind listening to it from time to time. This band would continue to release albums throughout the rest of the 80s. They kind of went unnoticed. They released an album without Kevin Dubrow in 1988, but that's a whole different story. And Kevin Dubrow would come back, release a few more albums with the band going into the 2000s until the time of his death on November 19th, 2007. So if you want to check out my video of Mental Health for its 40th anniversary, I'll link that one right there. Please like this video. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. You can find me on Facebook and TikTok. Links in the video description. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.